takes a little bit.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Osquery office hours. I'm pleased to see there's a whole lot of people here, so that's pretty cool. Welcome, everyone. Usual format is announcements first and then kind of whatever. Big announcement is that we declared 5.0 stable. So 5.0 rolled out to everywhere people might find it, I think. I don't know if we updated Chocolatey yet, but it's certainly gone out everywhere else and packages are up. Big thanks to Trail of Bits and me, I guess. Thank you, Charvel, especially for everything you've done on this
No, yeah, huge thanks to everyone who helped test out and putting up with all the betas and bug fixes and documentation and everything. And Nick just mentioned that he'll try to get Chocolatey packages up later today.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I've heard about any bugs. No one seems to have popped up anywhere complaining, so remarkably anticlimactic, but great.
I wonder if that's why the new faces are here today. Yeah, we deployed 5.0.1 to the stable channel of Orbit, and seems to have not caused issues. We only have pretty limited visibility into, how many hosts would have received that, and certainly none besides whatever anyone reports in terms of errors, but nothing reported yet.
Nice. Next section is usually a bit of a free-form question opportunity, so if anyone joining us, especially for the first time, has any questions they want to ask, any bugs they're hitting, any configuration weirdness, kind of free-form, things that don't need like a formal agenda item, anyone's got any questions?
Put a couple things on there related to eBPF stuff. One of which was an issue that I hit. One of which I think Zachary is maybe on this call. He hit that too. I just wanted to highlight that.
I moved your stuff down to full agenda items, but if we could talk about that next. This is the eBPF ones. Okay,
Should we do those when we hit them in the agenda? I saw there was a hand raise from Alexander.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you want to discuss the stuff I can talk about or if you want to dive into eBPF since it was already raised. Okay, we can jump into the 2 points I put up real quick if we want to. Basically, I think it was mentioned a few months ago. I opened a blueprint for adding a browser history support. And a few months ago, there was like office hours to discuss it. And it was mentioned, perhaps waiting if I could join one to talk about it a little bit more. I'm able to join this one. So basically, I think the main benefits of parsing this type of artifact is from a forensic investigation perspective. If an organization is investigating a system for malicious activity, pulling browser history is part of the necessary steps to do a full investigation of a system. Versus, doing something like a triage or something like that. A full investigation, you're pulling back a whole bunch of artifacts, and browser history is part of that standard. It's not standard practice, but it's a standard artifact you want to pull back. You're looking for things like malware being downloaded. Did an attacker access any sort of data exfil sites? Did they browse any internal SharePoint sites, any internal documents? On Windows, browsers record Internet Explorer, at least in Edge, I think as well, records files being opened. So do they open any documents? This is just a powerful forensic artifact that I think would be beneficial for Osquery to parse and have. Again, it's mainly from a forensic perspective on the value of this. I know there's been discussion on privacy concerns as well. I'm not sure if anyone has any other comments, or I can just keep talking about it. Or
yeah, I mean, I think typically the concerns that have been brought up are or privacy related. And we've, the Osquery project over time has discussed the inclusion or exclusion of various kinds of tables, which is often led to discussions of where we draw the line in terms of utility versus privacy. And it's, something that I think is evolving. But during that last conversation, it seemed fairly clear that folks were not going to be open to having a browser history table explicitly in the core like that.
Okay.
I think that making it easier to deploy extension tables with Osquery would perhaps be a step in the right direction for folks being able to get whatever kind of tables they like. I'd also add that using the Osquery Go, it would be super easy to write this kind of table, include it as an extension, and really include any kind of tables that you like, accessing any arbitrary data if that's something that you find appropriate in your environments and the scenarios in which you're using Osquery. And
Yeah,
then
I
I think
guess-
allows the Osquery project to say, we've maintained this line, and Osquery itself is a project that aims to respect these kind of respect this kind of privacy concerns.
Yeah, I guess the two questions I have about that, I guess extensions are okay, but it's just like another software deployment an organization has to do. So now, in addition to deploying Osquery, maybe they have that down as a science, but I guess, I feel like sometimes organizations, they struggle with software deployments, in addition to deploying an Osquery package, maybe they have to just deploy now an arbitrary binary file. You have to configure Osquery to load the extension. In my experience, I've only played with a few extensions. I've seen the watchdog kill it. So now they would have to configure Osquery not to. Am I muted? No.
No, we can
So
hear
they
you.
may have to, so maybe they have to configure Osquery now in the watchdog to make sure the watchdog doesn't kill extensions. I guess for the privacy point, I mean, that's a valid concern, I guess. But there already some tables in Osquery that kind of approach that privacy line. For example, the extended attributes table can show the URL or a file is downloaded, for example. So a user could see, an analyst could see, oh, this PDF file is downloaded from this user's bank. This document is downloaded from their medical provider, stuff like that. I know they all have legitimate use cases as well, and just like browser history has legitimate use cases. But again, I think you mentioned, it sounds like the committee, I guess core contributors have decided on it, which is fine. I respect that. But I just wanted to throw out my 2 cents on the whole extensions and I guess privacy aspects too.
I'd say that you're right that there are existing tables and functionality that definitely skirt closer to that line than we might want. And there are things that I don't know if we would accept into core today if they arrived, but taking something out is a lot harder than sort of keeping new things from coming in. So I feel like there's a little bit of a bind. It's very easy for me to, no, it's not even easy. It's possible for me to enunciate some privacy perspective, but then it's very hard for me to extend that and say, and we should take everything out of Osquery that people are already using. So I don't know how to balance that. And I think it's probably worth challenging this status quo occasionally. Like, I don't really want to talk about this every office hours, but like, I'm kind of happy to revisit this every year or so, because there may be a time when we're like, oh, actually, we should just have that in core, or, oh, okay, it's time to take those other things out. I just don't know that we're there today.
Yep. Okay, understood. I guess also then just to mention one last thing. If browser history was then part of core before it was, I guess, became open source, I mean, would it still then be included in core then if in a hypothetical scenario, if it was already included and it's accepted because we don't want to take things out, that I guess, I don't know, I just feel like the privacy argument then gets undercut a tiny amount, since if it's already if it was included.
Well, sorry, what I'm saying is at some future point I could imagine accepting this table. And at some future point, I could imagine removing everything we thought was too close to the privacy line. Like, I could imagine doing both of those in another OS query release. I don't know. It might be interesting to explore what would be easier to deploy extensions. And I may not be a typical site, but in the places I have run OS query at a relatively large company, and then now for Collide, I've had a lot of control and ability to kind of ship extensions if I want to. I think one of the things that OSQuery has done is OSQuery provides a package repository and builds OSQuery packages for most operating systems. And I think we've kind of done ourselves a disservice because that ends up being the path most people take to install OSQuery, but in many ways it's very limiting. We sort of ship some kind of weird startup scripts there, and it's very hard for someone to come along and be like, oh, I really want to ship like my extension. How do I do that? So we've sort of like painted ourselves into a corner with the way most people seem to install OSQuery. I don't have a simple answer to that, but I kind of just want to mention it.
For what it's worth, that's something that I'm kind of hoping to address with the packaging tooling that we're building for Orbit. We're not supporting packaging custom extensions yet, but the intent is to do that and make it as easy as possible to enable these kinds of use cases. And then Alexander, just to look back at what you were saying about like if it had originally been shipped with browser history, would it be there? This is a long time ago now, and I'm not sure we ever documented these things. But back when we were creating OSQuery at Facebook, we were trying to introduce the philosophy of the same philosophy that we're discussing now, that somewhere we ought to make a line between the utility of the tables and the privacy, potential privacy violations that they open up. So I mean, I think just to step back to that time, I think that we made a conscious decision at that time not to include that table. And then again, I'll just echo what Seth said, which is, I think we should be open to continuing to have this conversation. I also think it's potentially worth exploring, like, would OSQuery be willing to build in a set of more, what would we call them? A set of more potentially sensitive tables into the standard OSQuery build, and then you'd have to enable specific configuration in order to get access to those or something like that. I don't know. These things could be worth exploring.
I think the other thing that maybe in a different direction, but I wanted to mention it, and I don't know, I'm not a forensics person. One of the things about OSQuery is ultimately OSQuery is running on the agent. So it assumes a sort of half-trusted environment in that sense. For some kinds of forensics work, I wonder if carving the files off and then analyzing them outside makes more sense. It does require like additional tooling and steps, and like the file carving is this whole other interesting privacy question. But
Yep. So yeah, you're right. You could absolutely carve the files out and look at them. But if you're investigating, 100 endpoints, 50 endpoints, I don't think that scales easily. It doesn't scale easily, I think. Versus, querying them, joining, filtering. If you want, if an attacker access a specific URL and you want to see if that URL is accessed on any other endpoint, I think it's easier to make a query than to carve potentially 100 SQLite databases and opening them all up.
I want to say maybe, because I think that in these contexts, everything really depends on what you're using as a fleet manager to coordinate those. So if you didn't have a fleet manager, then of course running those queries on every node and correlating the responses is going to be a very manual operation. If you had some kind of fleet manager, as there are many vendors in this room, then it becomes a lot easier to imagine, oh, well, I'll just, say select star from Firefox browsing history, right? And I'll get the data back in something that looks like a table. But there's a lot of space in between those, right? A lot of fleet managers are just sort of shove raw JSON into some kind of data lake system, and that, then anything you're building that's doing joining us on top of that. And I could certainly imagine a fleet manager that knew how to extract the URLs out of a carve and then kind of do whatever you want with it. So I don't know if like, is there space here to think about, well, what would a forensically oriented fleet manager look like, and how much of that would you be able to build server side?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Carving and extracting it from a server. But again, if you're just doing carving and you just want a specific URL, I'm not sure, would it still be beneficial then, if you have 10,000 endpoints, carve 10,000 SQL-like databases, extract all that data on a server side? Maybe, yeah, okay, yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
The utility of the table is clear to me, Alexander. I'm for sure with you in terms of utility. I mean, I think the thing that we have to balance is that we, at least in the past, we've often heard from folks that this sense of, especially privacy sensitive things like browser history are not available, has made it like politically easier within their organizations to get Osquery deployed. And so from my perspective, I'm mostly hoping to balance the utility that everyone can find across organizations. And so it's, I can see that clearly for you, there's more utility to having this table. And then for other folks in other organizations, at least in the past, and perhaps it's not the same today, but at least in the past, there's clearly been utility to not having. Yeah, okay. So, and it makes me think, is it possible, GDPR. I mean, but can we choose not to enable certain kinds of features in some way that is transparent to the end users or something that could allow, folks who need that kind of more sensitive access, so that, everyone can get their needs? I don't know. I think, to me, that seems like the most, if we think that extensions are too difficult, then that seems like the most reasonable path to try to go down. But I think we need to get some buy-in from, various folks who use Osquery, across the range of organizations and types of use cases.
I think if you imagine something like that, there's still a set of privacy questions that are thorny a little bit, of like, okay, so imagine there was an option to like enable or disable some class of tables, right? What's to keep that from simply being enabled on a server, right? It's sort of server shoves the config down. So there's kind of a whole, I feel like it's one of these philosophical, how do you trust questions? And I don't think there's a simple answer. I was talking with Alessandro a couple of weeks ago, and we were spitballing some crazy idea about, well, what if it was a very end user centric, the end user grants explicit permissions from Osquery on a server to something, and I can't imagine how that would work, but there's food for thought there. So I don't. There's no simple answer, is what I'll say.
Yep, understood. I can keep talking about this forever, but I don't want to hog up all the time. So, I mean, if we want to discuss it more in Slack, or, it sounds like there's a consensus has been reached, so, which is fine. I don't want to hog the whole office hours.
I'm
Unless
pretty
anyone
happy
wants
to
keep
talk
talking
about how
about
to make extensions easier to deploy, though, either in office hours or on Slack. I feel like there's pretty good space there, because I think as more people do more things in Osquery, it's good to have extensions.
And Alexander, like, as you are thinking about this personally, like, is part of the challenge that in the environments that you use Osquery in, it's going to be difficult for you to deploy an extension if you want this capability, or are you kind of extrapolating to the general user who has needs similar to yours?
Yeah, so I just use Osquery personally. I do forensics for a living, but we use a different product. But I'm just referring to as general. If I was in Osquery, if I had used Osquery, and if I was an analyst, browser history is something I would want from a forensic perspective to do. Again, a full investigation. So I'm only speaking as what I would think other forensic analysts would want if they were using Osquery.
I see.
That makes sense. I think I'd be hesitant to assume that it's hard to install extensions. I just don't know. There's too many questions there. I think most vendors ship extensions at this point or their own frameworks around that. Certainly all the Osquery vendors I've seen are doing something like that under the hood.
Yep, I agree. And I think a lot of vendors are shipping their own extensions. I'm not sure of how open they are to shipping, third-party extensions. But like I said, I don't want to hog the whole discussion about this, even though I could. But I think others want to talk about other stuff too.
Okay, well, next agenda item then. Binary parsing libraries from Alexander.
Again, this is something you saw. You posted, Joseph, and I posted something similar in Slack a week ago. I thought it was a cool idea, supporting adding something like that. But
I created this issue because of your Slack conversation.
I see. I think Alessandro mentioned some concerns with it, but I think it would be a unique thing to add. But I can also see some hesitancy in it as well. But it would be useful because a lot of forensic artifacts are don't have, you either have to write a parser or use a library, and I think adding something like a tie could make parsing a little bit easier. You don't have to write any C++ code; it's generated for you. But I think Alessandro mentioned some concerns about autocode generation.
So I think there are two implicit questions in this. One of them is whether Osquery wants to be in the business of parsing various file artifacts. And we've often concluded yes, but I don't know if we want to universally conclude that. I don't feel like I know the answer to that yet. And if we decide that yes, we do, then there's a question of, is there a library that we can like and trust enough such that it becomes easier for us to build support for new artifact formats? And I would completely defer to the C++ experts on that second one.
Yeah, I think my main concern is just adding a new layer of, a new language, and then having to deal with generated code, which usually is a pain, as you really cannot change much in it if you need to. And of course, also whether the project itself has fuzzing and code quality metrics implemented. I'm not an expert with the library, so I know it by name, but I never actually used it. But yeah, and maybe the second question for me was whether we really need such a library. It's not like we have to parse a huge number of different formats.
Yeah, on the note, we do parse many formats. Also, we have a high range of compatibility between format versions thanks to the official libraries used. So having to manually, maintain that compatibility adds, I think, quite an overhead. Maybe especially on Linux.
I guess the idea, though, is this would be used to get coverage for formats that don't have official libraries.
I think for me, one of the benefits would be, from my opinion, instead of manually writing C++ code, you basically write a YAML file. Katai would then parse that YAML file into a basically auto-generated parser for you. So I think it was mentioned a few weeks ago, the jump list format, the OLE CFF format is extremely complex. You would write basically a Katai format file, which I think one already exists, but you would use that, auto-generate the code, and instead of you writing a manual parser, Katai basically makes the parser for you. And so you could potentially, write parsers for any number of formats. Maybe one doesn't exist yet. I think that would be one of the main benefits for it.
I was thinking that this could be really useful from an extension, as with other additional feature in Osquery that we merge, we also accept a certain amount of things we will have to maintain forever.
No, that's a good point.
Speaking about the jump list, for example, we are speaking about 3 different formats, which are only partially documented. It is true that you can use parsers written by others, or you can generate one with Kaitai, but I'm wondering how much this is going to weigh on the core maintainers and on new contributors once there's a bug in there and it's not possible or easy to regenerate the parser from the templates because maybe they are out of date, nobody is vetting them anymore. Or if we built it on our own, then maybe they really have to, know the format in deep knowledge to be able to update it and keep it working. So,
yep, all good points. I guess the only
I'm not sure I would like to promote having custom parsers for everything, especially if there is an official library available that we can inspect and determine whether it is good or not for integration.
I feel like this and the last topic and maybe some future PRs from Puffy said all sort of fall under this umbrella of how can we make Osquery more valuable in a forensics context. And I almost wonder if like there's a home for a Osquery forensics extension, be it its own project or be it somewhere under the Osquery Foundation. Like what would that look like? If we sort of said, okay, here's a thing, would we have different coding standards for it? Would we say like, cool, let's pull in these artifact parsing libraries? Like, how would we vet that? Would we say, okay, it has a slightly different standard? Would we say, no, it can't be under the Osquery umbrella? So I don't know, but I feel like there's something there to think about.
Probably we can encourage.
Yeah,
we can.
And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it would be useful to have a forensic extension. I think the key point here is giving ourselves the freedom to drop or include new features without having to worry too much about breaking changes. I think that is the major issue we have right now.
I don't know if I want to talk about it now, but I'd be down for a conversation about like what would a forensics extension look like.
I guess I know, like you said, not now, but I guess the question for me would this just be one gigantic extension for every single conceivable forensic artifact? I feel like some of these forensic artifacts are worth being in core. There's a whole bunch of them that some I'm working on, some haven't started yet. But again, I guess extension would be useful for stuff that wouldn't be part of core, but I feel like most of them it would be nice to have them in core. So an organization, everyone can benefit from it, and not just those who deploy the extension.
Oh, I'm partly hinting at this because it's one way to get through like wanting browser tables, right? And wanting things like jump list, which Alessandro seems pretty skeptical about. So things like that seem easier to stick into an extension as a thing, and either they find value and maybe we pull them into core or not. I know at one point in time, a million years ago, the intent was to see things move from extensions to core. So I don't know if that's a model we would want to bring back. Practically speaking, I don't think it's ever happened. I think that part of the development lifecycle got dropped.
I think that may also be partly because not much work has actually gone into extensions up till now.
Well, I don't know that that's true. It's just that all of, like, Collide has put extensive work into extensions. They're just all in Go. So there's no, there's no compatibility there.
Yeah, well, and I support, and I mean, Trail of Bits has also put extensive work into extensions, although I think much of that is for things that do things like rights or network access, or they shell out, and because of that, had been decided not to fit into the core model of Osquery or the model of what we want in Osquery core tables. I mean, one thing that I would hate to see from this discussion or all of this ongoing discussion is that, like, Alexander, who's clearly trying to contribute a lot of valuable stuff to the project, finds that the project, there's no good way to actually get these contributions out to the community. And I'd love to make sure that we get to some conclusion where the community does have access to these valuable contributions.
Are you talking about the pull requests that are open?
I think Zach's talking more broadly, like
Oh, I see.
maybe a specific pull request, but maybe 5 of them, and maybe one that's coming tomorrow.
Sure, and I also hear Alexander saying that there are other things that they want to look at to include, and I just want to be an advocate, from the technical steering committee, as like, we have an enthusiastic member of the community here trying to bring a lot of value to the project, and I hope we can find a way to include those things and help Alexander feel motivated to continue contributing.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I wanted to mention something about the extensions. I didn't work on this since there was another person looking into it, but I'm not sure whether it actually got some progress. But it should be trivial to update the packaging in Osquery so that you can more easily embed extensions inside your own package. So ideally, if you could download the assigned binary and rerun the packaging scripts that we have provided, you could specify a parameter which would bring in your own extensions. So this should probably solve most of the problems with the deployment of them. And I'm not sure whether there is an issue about it already, but we can create one. I think that if we solve the deployment of the extensions, they automatically become more applicable for this kind of tables, more useful and valuable.
Zach, you mentioned you have to vanish, so I want to pause this discussion. Are there other things on this agenda that are related to you or things you want to talk about?
No, nothing for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to Alessandro's point, I think any step we can make in the direction of making it easier to deploy extensions is worthwhile, and hopefully helps people to create extensions that are able to be widely used.
Okay, I'll see if we already have an issue about it. If not, I'll create one.
Thank you. Okay. Next up, eBPF issues. I don't know what's going on, so someone else is going to have to talk.
Yeah, I can talk about it. Depending on the kernel, we have noticed that sometimes when you try to capture a buffer from a syscall, you fail. With buffer, I mean things like maybe literally a buffer, like the socket structure for a connect, or maybe a string for an open or open app syscall. The problem there is that page fault handling gets disabled when your probe is called, meaning that if the memory that contains the string you're trying to capture is not loaded, it will silently fail, and you will get just an error and a buffer full of zeros. So the first way to fix this is to change how these buffers are captured. I have a pull request up to change this. So you, in short, instead of trying to capture the buffer when you enter a syscall, you try to capture it when you leave the syscall. By that point, the kernel will have tried at least one to access the buffer, and ideally it is in memory and readable also for you. And the second problem was about memory. There are still a couple of things to check on the pull request. There's a problem with the execve probe not loading correctly on a kernel version documented in the PR or the issue, I think. But once this is finished, I'll also look into the other problem as well.
So you think that memory issue is related to that same pull request?
No, they are not related, but I will fix them both once I manage to find why it's not loading correctly.
Okay.
Do you need anything for these, Alessandro, or are you kind of happily chugging through them?
Yep, I have everything I need. I also have the distribution and exact kernel version where I can reproduce the issue.
Nice. Okay, well, wonderful.
Side note, I'm writing a new library to parse kernel debug symbols. And it's almost ready, and this will open us to new things, like parsing kernel structures without having to parse kernel headers. So we have a bit of an overhead in the BPF probes right now because we can only access public interfaces and public types. So we will be able to make it more useful and lightweight in the future.
Nice. Next up, PID file handling.
Yeah, so I have a draft to change how PID file is currently handled in Osquery. We have something in the core that creates this PID file as a text file. And then if it is already there, it attempts to read it, and then it enumerates the processes to see if there's an Osquery process with a matching process ID. There is no locking in there. So if you start other Osquery instances at the right time, you can easily go around this check. The new implementation uses file locking. And at least on POSIX systems, we use flock. So we can only have a single instance that can have this lock active. And it gets automatically unlocked as the last file descriptor is closed. So it means that if Osquery crashes, the unlock happens automatically. On Windows, it's slightly different, but kind of the same. We open the file with file sharing enabled just for reading. And we also specify the delete and close flag. So again, the create file for the PID file will only succeed once. There is no, I tested this locally, it works, but I don't want to commit this in master until we have other people have a say about it. One downside is on POSIX. The flock call can succeed regardless of the mode. So if you have a file which is owned by root, if your unprivileged user can open it, then you can lock the file. So the problem here is that if you know where the PID file is, an unprivileged user can open it and lock it.
Is that true if they don't have permission to the enclosing directory?
They have to be able to see the file. If they can open it, then it's an issue.
Do they, if it's in a directory they can see but don't have writer access to?
They can still lock it. So the change we have in the PID file makes the file only readable by root. If it is an issue, we can create a user-readable PID file that just contains the process ID, and then we can also create a root-only PID file .log, for example, if that should solve the issue.
I find myself wondering what the point of the PID file is.
The PID file was, I guess it's not really used anymore because luckily we have things like systemd on Linux.
That's where I'm going, right? Is that like PID files a million years ago existed as part of how init systems worked and as locking mechanisms. In Osquery, we have a locking mechanism baked into RocksDB, and we have, like, most people are going to run through an init system that has this functionality built in.
Yeah.
So I like having a PID file because I'm old school Unix, and I'm like, how can we not have one? But if I stop and question myself, I'm like, well, what is it doing for us?
Yeah. So I didn't want to break this functionality if there is anyone using this. The correct implementation preserves it while also making sure that the log file cannot be tampered with by an unprivileged user.
This all sounds fine. I mean, so it'll move to being a root-only file, which is not uncommon. It will act as a real log file, and it'll still have the PID for anyone that happens to want that. So at 10,000 feet, that sounds fine.
Yeah, and let me know if anyone wants to take a look at the code. Let me know if there's anything wrong you see in it, or if you have opinions.
I'll try and take a look, but I don't know. Next item I put down was package serving. I thought I would give people an update. So folks may or may not know or remember, but our package serving bills are actually quite high. I pay about $5K a month for package.osquery.io. At some point, I'll shove that all through the foundation, but I haven't done it yet. And I went looking at this because I realized this is just completely ridiculous. So I went digging at it, and what it looks like to me is that there's a handful of very large sites that download Osquery all the time. There's like 10 of them, and there's one of them that's an order of magnitude bigger than everyone else. And I don't know anything about them other than the IP addresses they talk to us using.
Can you share one? We'll reverse look up and see who they are.
It's an Amazon VPC endpoint. You have no information about it.
Okay.
Unless you work for Amazon Security. So of the endpoints I've looked at, a bunch of them are basically just Amazon endpoints. So this is like some customer inside Amazon is basically probably running a bunch of ephemeral nodes that start up and install Osquery. There's also a bank in Europe, but they're down way below these like big Amazon sites. So staring at a lot of package serving cost and Amazon cost stuff, what I have come to conclude is that CloudFront is not the right answer. And the right answer is probably something that looks much closer to S3 raw storage, because S3 doesn't charge data transfer fees if you're in region. So I have started playing with things that will issue redirects either based on your Amazon region, or if you're one of these particularly noisy IP addresses, to just talk to the buckets directly. Oh, also I set up buckets in a bunch of other regions and started replicating our data. So Sorry, it's a very short summary. There's a little bit more in the ticket that's linked off of office hours. I did a bunch of that over the last 12 hours. So tonight I'll maybe see if it affects what our outbound data stuff looks like. So the takeaway here is package serving is going to change because what we're doing now is not affordable. It will probably look the same to everyone. Like I think all of the usual package repo things should work, but people are likely to start getting redirects based on where they're coming from. Yeah, I can talk more about this, but it's probably not actually very exciting. Or maybe it is. I don't know. I can tell you that the very large sites are using x86, not ARM64.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you paying this out of your own?
Yes.
Okay. Can you retrieve some funds from the? Because I mean, we should.
At some point, I will run this all through the foundation. I haven't yet, partly just because I haven't wanted to deal with the paperwork. And I will either take it all as a giant tax write-off, or I will convince some other people to throw in money at it.
I think, even though it's a paperwork nightmare, or maybe it's slightly annoying, I don't know how bad. Even though we got to do that, if we show legitimately that Osquery does incur expenses, then we show a justification for some of our sponsors to kick in for it. It's like they won't kick in as long as our bank account seems to be full all the time.
That's a great point. Thank you for prodding me. Anyhow.
But like you said, it's not sustainable, and more people will set up CI pipelines that retrieve the package every hour, and then we'll be in a worst case.
This is not CI.
Could have been, but yeah, you're right. It probably isn't, because why would you put Osquery in your CI? But
I'm pretty sure these are Kubernetes or ephemeral nodes that people have basically a boot script that installs Osquery as opposed to baking it into an AMI image. So my guess is it's someone's startup script does apt-get update, apt-get install Osquery. Which is a little weird because you'd do better if you stuck it into your AMI, but I don't know who they are. I can't talk to them. I've considered just serving them 503s with a please talk to Ceph message, but that seems a little bit hostile.
Things will break and they'll never see it. But
anyhow, so it is actually interesting that there's one Amazon customer that appears to be the bulk of our bill. Anyhow, I think that shouldn't cost us. I don't know the answer to that.
Somewhere out there, Netflix is using Osquery, and this could be them. I shouldn't guess though. Shouldn't name names out here. Anyway.
Yeah. So I don't know the answer to a lot of that stuff. All I know is an IP address which resolves to an Amazon customer in US East 1. But that particular customer is now being redirected to the direct bucket endpoint, which should be much cheaper, if not free. So fun times in JavaScript CloudFormation, CloudFront recently. Okay. If anyone has any questions, sees any problems in the package serving, please holler at me. We can try and get it fixed.
Let's try to solve this. I mean, let us help out and definitely see if you can get reimbursement.
Yeah, I know. Every time I say this, you all are like, "You should submit some bills," and I'm like, "Yeah." So I'll get to it someday, I promise.
I didn't understand the entity of the damage until now I saw the numbers. I think the first time I saw it, I thought it was like a misspelling or a mistake in the number.
It got a lot bigger at one point. So I don't know. Anyhow. Next agenda item, Charvel, 5.x preflight.
One of the users in general pointed out that if theirs was a Mac OS case, like if you have 4.9 running and you grab the installer and install it, it doesn't stop the launchd service because we don't do any pre-flight checks and stopping it. We have never done it historically. Most of the time, people have relied on Chef or MDM or Puppet or whatever their deployment methods are to do that. I looked into a little bit. This is probably trivial to do, like check if launchd is running, whatever, stop it, install it. But my question is, should we be doing that, and can we do it in a cross-platform way?
I would tend to say that at a high level, the correct place to do this is not in a pre-install script, it's in a post-install script. So like the 4.9 pre-remove script would generally uninstall itself. That's what you would do on Windows or on Linux. I don't remember if macOS PKGs support pre-remove or post-remove either way.
They do both. They support both. So you can run a script before the package starts installing, and then run a script after the package is installed.
Can you run it when the package is removed?
Let me
actually. Well, no one removes PKGs
packet.
anyhow.
Yeah.
So, I feel like we're in a little bit of a weird place because, like, we could say the only way to do this would be to attempt to basically to have some heuristics that attempted to tell whether or not someone had a old Osquery 4.9 running that they wanted to be removed, right? So you could say, does someone have a 4.9 running that it looks like this is replacing it? But I wonder how often would those heuristics get the wrong thing?
So when doing like a 4.8 to 4.9, it kind of worked out because your identifiers were the same, your paths were the same.
Right.
So the installer just replaces the binary. So this is like, I don't know what the answer is. Like, technically this is doable, but my question is this something we should be doing? I know Windows has a little bit of a quirk, but I haven't explored that. And we also changed paths on Linux. So
we didn't change the systemd definition on Linux, though. So
yeah,
you'd still see that just kind of happen. And Linux actually would do an uninstall and then a reinstall. So the old one should be gone. PKG is, I think, the weirdest case because there's no uninstall. You just tend to like drop new ones on all the time, so that you'd end up with, I mean, what would even happen? You would like, because 4.9 like leaves binaries on disk.
So like you can use in the pre-flight script, you can like shut down the launchd service and then use package util forget or uninstall.
Well, launchcode will unload.
Yeah, that will unload it, but there's also package util forget. So in case like the paths are the same, you still, get all the benefits of stopping it and whatever. Or paths even differ in the future. If the identifiers are the same, you can remove it and install it.
I think I'd probably be okay sticking something into a pre-flight checklist that looked for what we thought was the old Osquery package and raised an error or just, disabled the launchd or something. The failure mode will be if someone else has a launchd that is installed using the Osquery identifier. We might accidentally stop it. But I feel like if that's the case, we might kind of just be like, yeah, oh well.
I wanted to also add that if you leave a previous instance of Osquery running, and this is only really possible on POSIX, you are again, you are an old instance of Osquery without its files, or, I mean, as a minimum, we have like OGS lenses, which, yes, they do not change as often. But I mean, I don't think it's really a good thing to like delete every file under the yeah, when Osquery is still running, basically, in any case, because in every case. Yeah.
I feel like we would only want to delete the init files, and probably only on macOS actually, and only because on macOS no one does uninstalls.
And I mean, at the same time, on Windows, given how Windows works, so if you use the MSI, you can't, well, if you do any uninstall when Osquery is still running, it will fail because there is file locking. So, but yeah, on the MSI, the MSI does not currently stop the service. I think though Chocolatey does, but also on Windows there is, I mean, an annoying thing where sure you can decide to go forward with like uninstalling, but then it requires you to reboot the machine.
How?
So
if Windows doesn't stop the service, how does an MSI actually install over an old one? Like, how does the upgrade work?
You have to have the Osquery not running as a service.
Yeah, you'd have to, and Service Manager gets real weird too if you try and update the service definitions.
Yeah, so I think this is something, and again, as you've said, also Linux has it is keeping the old instance running. So I think this is something that has to be maybe addressed on all platforms.
I think this is a Mac specific issue. I don't think other platforms come into this.
Well, I mean, this issue has been raised specifically for macOS, yes, but I wonder again why we want to keep this behavior on Linux, Windows.
Well, what I'm saying is Linux. So Linux with a standard systemd setup, when you upgrade a package, it will uninstall the old one first, which will go through the normal stop process. Like it won't just drop the new files over.
It doesn't. It does drop, substitute all the files and keep Osquery running.
It keeps Osquery. It doesn't issue a restart
as a systemd. No. Yeah.
Oh well, then we should fix that. That's easy.
Yeah, and that's again the same issue as with Windows, which
no,
Windows
no,
it fails, but
no.
Yeah.
These are all really different. I maintain that while maybe they're similar looking, the actual semantics of how they work are different enough. You need different solutions that frequently need help with the OS packaging systems.
So what I mean is, I mean, I understand. I am curious. I understand on a high level. I'm curious what is the specific difference on Windows. Like I'm simply thinking that
on Linux, right, you can install a new package, and then in your post-install script, you can just say like systemd restart, right? And because the binaries, because you can overwrite a running binary on Linux, that will work in basically all cases, unless you've gone and changed the name of the systemd unit file, right? And I don't know what happens if you change the name or path of the systemd unit file. I don't know how dpackage or RPM tracks the existence of the old one. I haven't explored that. But in Linux, the simple case of like, new package over old package, it knows the old package is uninstalled and you can issue a restart command. And because the binary is new on disk, it'll be fine. On Windows, you can't do that because you can't replace binaries that are running. So you either have to, I don't know how MSI does it, like this is common and I just don't know what the pattern is. I assume there's a bunch of, like, I think Wix probably just has a bunch of like, stop the old service, install the new service, and then start the new service because nothing else works. So the packaging formats have to sort of bake that in. Because if you don't do that, you can't put a new binary over the old one. And if you don't do that, you'll probably corrupt Service Manager, having accidentally corrupted Service Manager a dozen times developing Launcher. So like Windows is fundamentally different than Linux because of the basic semantics of how you change service manager definitions and how you replace binaries on disk.
But I agree, we have to fix it. I think maybe it's just, I was just meaning that. I think there is something to fix on all platforms, not the specific way.
I just think it works out very different because of the platforms are so different in how they handle this narrow use case.
Well, and again, I think there is actually something still common that I see in every platform. The package, when you uninstall a package, you want it to you want for it to take out, stop everything has brought in, so clean up after itself. So stopping a service, then to be able also to just remove the file. Because even only if we are only talking about an uninstall, you can't uninstall Osquery on Windows if you don't stop the service. So
we could fix that.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just saying, I think on every platform we should make sure that an uninstall upgrade, I mean, there is a way that the package cleans after itself in some way.
Yeah, I think that's not unreasonable. I think we probably need slightly different answers on every platform.
Yeah, totally sure. Yeah.
So I guess I can open a Blueprint issue and kind of gather the thoughts there. And because like with uninstall on macOS, like the question then is, or any platform, like should we also remove the results if they use a file system logger results file or config file?
Those are user, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Those are user files. So yeah,
exactly.
That's different.
Yeah.
You'd probably leave the Osquery database too.
Yeah.
That would generally persist. I'd say if you want to do Blueprint, or if you want to just write code and open a PR, or like whatever is less work for you. Because it sounds like there's probably consensus that there's some stuff to fix here, and it might be very simple stuff.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And maybe just on a similar note, well, not really. We have some differences again on how we handle services start or registration on various platforms. Like on macOS, you have, if I recall right, you still have to do it manually. On Linux, it's automatic, but the service does not start. On Windows, the MSI installs the service and also starts the service. But on the Chocolatey package, it doesn't install any service, and it doesn't obviously start any service. So it's more like macOS. Was kind of wondering if it would make sense for me to uniform also this behavior.
I think unifying those makes sense. One of the questions that raises to me is, I don't know what the correct answer is, because if you install a service, if you haven't configured Osquery, is there any point having it running? Like, what would it mean? And the answer, I think the answer is probably that we should have it running because anything else is just too complicated, right? Like you could imagine looking for whether there was a config file and then not running, but then you get into service manager restart. So it's almost easier to just say, you just run without a config, it does nothing. So I'm curious what, if you've got other thoughts about that.
I mean, so not really. I was almost going to say the opposite. Like since it's really only the MSI that starts the service, we can change on Wix the configuration so that it doesn't start it. Then maybe we can also discuss about trying to do some automatic registration or not, like on macOS and Chocolatey, registration or service creation.
I'm just thinking about if I installed a random service, I would kind of expect it to be running, right? I'd expect like the workflow around Apache or Nginx or something to be like, install it. It might not be useful yet, configure it, and then restart it. I wouldn't expect it to be install it, configure it, register it, start it. Like feels different.
Yeah, I guess we can. we can open a blueprint. Right now I don't have any strong opinion either way.
Okay. We're about at time. Alexander, I think we probably will not get to talking about the other PRs you wanted, but maybe I'll remind people that Alexander has a bunch of PRs hanging out.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe we can start looking into one of them. And
no, go ahead. Whichever you think.
There's some work to do in each one of them, and I guess we can start small with refactoring one of them. I don't know which one yet.
I guess my 2 cents from. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was finished. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents. If I had to choose, for me at least, from my perspective, the most valuable of the 5, Amcache and raw registry. I think most people will see the most value into that if I know everyone is busy with other stuff. If one had to be picked to be reviewed first or a priority, I would say that one. Again,
which one did you say?
Amcache and the raw registry parsing PR.
Okay.
But again, also, the unified access logging, I think Trailbits, they did all the heavy lifting for that. I just fixed, like 4 lines. So that would probably be the quickest to review as well. So again, whichever ones the reviewers want to look at. But from my perspective, Amcache and raw registry would be my preferred.
Okay, we'll take a look at those.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, nice to see everyone. And
thank you, Steph. As always.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.